I really want honest answers here. What about churches is like out of date?
It's hard to be like, oh yeah, we're a church of Christ and all about love, and then at the same time to be like, oh, by the way,
we mess up.
So and so is getting a divorce. So and so is cheating on their spouse.
We have access to so much technology, and everything's right at our fingertips, and we can have anything we want in an instant. That like coming to church is almost like boring. Like
that's a fascinating idea.
That is really fascinating.
Well, here we are. I don't know if are we recording podcast number 4 or something like that?
This is podcast number 4.
Here we go, number 4. There's another one that's not out there yet, but Fernie and I are excited to have Hayden Snook. Hayden, you want to say anything about yourself at all?
Oh, man.
Other than the fact that you're wearing a lot of Yankees gear right now. I don't know if that's going to make people listen or not listen, but
yeah, I don't know when it'll come out, but
right. Yeah, exactly.
Hopefully by then the Yankees will listen.
Right, perfect.
Yeah, Hayden Snook. I've never been asked this question on podcast before. Who am I?
Yeah, you can either answer like a really, really deep question, or you can just tell us like some basics about your life. I don't care.
Right. Yeah. So I am relatively new diving into the Christian faith in a way. Back in 2020 is when I kind of dove back into faith, and Christ, of course, accepted me with loving open arms. So excited to be joining on to talk more about faith and talking more about where our generation is in faith. Also, just about myself in general, worship leader here at Kish Church. Love doing worship here and getting people involved in music. And it's a big part of my life. And Jesus has opened that door of opportunity for me. So, that's pretty much.
Maybe this is a question I shouldn't ask, but just because I feel like we want to talk about younger folks today and nobody can see you two. How old are you, Hayden?
I'm 29.
29. And Fern, you're what?
23.
23. So 29, 23, and I'm 44. So we're kind of flipping the deal. I think in fancy podcast terminology, we call it flip the mic or some kind of thing like that. And I'm going to ask questions of them because the whole idea of today's podcast is that I want to learn kind of like about the church as it relates to particularly young adults. These two know that I'm like real serious about caring for younger folks in the challenges of what it looks like to be, particularly to be and live an active Christian faith in 2024 as someone who's in their 20s. And I'm somewhat aware of that, but I'm also not in their shoes. And so I'm also a church pastor, and what that means is I get a chance to kind of pick their brains about how to help me and this church and the other churches that I'm cheering on to think about, especially young adults and what that looks like. I thought we'd start off with this question for you, Hayden, in particular, mostly because you and I were emailing back and forth about some of the things related to kind of a current increase, I don't know if people know this or not, in young men connected to the Christian church. I don't know if you can like talk a little bit about that, either from your experience or what you know and trend-wise or whatever. Yeah, so
Gen Z in particular, there's a trend among young men that they're outpacing women in the church. And this is the first time, basically, in over 100 years that that's the case. As a matter of why, I guess you could go down a whole rabbit hole of reasons. First that I think of is I feel like men don't, especially modern men with the way the world is, are starting to feel out of place, feeling displaced in a way. Modern feminism and other aspects of the church maybe not are more traditional, things like that. They're kind of colliding, where it's like modern feminism is telling women, young women, don't be moms, go out and create a career and work for yourself, all that, which is great. That's fantastic. I think the career is valuable and work is valuable. But as men are told, like, oh, you don't need to be a provider anymore. You don't need to be the head of the household. You don't need to be a leader. I feel like men are starting to feel displaced, and that's where the younger generation, I feel, is starting to kind of resonate with the church, where they're seeing tradition, they're seeing moral obligation, they're seeing a place where they can fit in the most, and that's kind of where, at least that's kind of where I've kind of dove into, like why that is, and I think just the traditionalism of the church and that framework for like kind of meaningful choices in your life, I think that opens a door for men to be like, oh, I can belong to something that promotes leadership and where men can kind of fit in and relate with each other.
Am I saying this correctly if I say something like, you like the idea of, you think young men are looking for some kind of meaning outside of just themselves, like, hey, have a fun life, live it up. There's something more to this life than that.
Correct.
Give me more responsibility, maybe, and the church is a place for that to happen.
Yeah.
It's meaning comes from responsibility.
Right. It's super exciting in a way when you really think about it. For men and women, even the fact that women in the church currently are now going to be seeing an uptick of men coming into the church.
Yeah, sure.
It creates more serving opportunities and maybe projects that would have taken more people. Maybe there's some men that are there that want to jump on it, and it becomes because men and women complement each other in such a fantastic way that getting more men in the church and even more women in the church is a good thing. It's going to be a positive benefit
for everybody.
Yeah, overall.
Fern, I have a specific question I wanted to ask you, but do you have anything to say to that first? Or?
No, I was going to say my first thought when you brought that up about, more men being involved in the church over women, I would say that my first thought went to the whole like feminism movement. That's definitely probably a huge factor in that number, because I feel like the social media today is constantly like telling women to empower themselves. You don't need a man. Just provide for yourself, and it's it's kind of a more selfish view on things, which, like you said, those are all great things to have and to pursue, but it's very far from the biblical truth. In most cases, it seems like it's being approached and from like a secular point of view, I think so.
Yeah, when I preached a little bit on this topic recently and talked about how I just love Philippians 2 and how it talks about how Jesus came to empty himself for the good of others. And I think what you're kind of saying, Hayden, is like guys want to be able to empty themselves for the good of other people. People in their community, friends, women, except kids. That's a huge deal in my mind, because I feel like so much of men as parents has been kind of missing in our culture. And then to your point, Fern, it's like I think women have such great gifts already in emptying themselves for the good of others, like in compassionate care and stuff. But they can flourish in the ways that they can do that when all genders are represented. So my more specific question for you, Fern, is that I just know from our conversations in the past that you're always excited to try to bring up Christianity and Christian faith with coworkers, people who haven't believed, this kind of thing. What is your sense of like how folks who maybe did not grow up in the church or maybe had a bad experience or whatever, how they're thinking about the church nowadays in ways that are unhelpful, like they're misunderstanding what the church is or meant to be, or what they're missing because they just are completely oblivious to what Christian faith is all about?
Yeah, I would say that the top thing would be that they look at the church as being hypocritical. I would say that's the top thing.
Yeah, I would say it's probably very common.
Judgmental.
Yeah.
They don't ever, I feel like people don't ever really learn who Jesus is. They just look at the people in the church and they say, I don't want to be like those people who say one thing and do another. I would say to that, though, that we're all broken and we're all just trying to be more like Christ. And I'm sorry if you were hurt by the church and that you see it that way. And there are people who are like that. Another thing, too, would be that they look at the church as maybe outdated. They
wait. I want to ask you, like, to drill down deeper on both the things, the outdated and the hypocritical.
Okay.
Can you say? Is there any other thoughts on like specifics about? I think I have like maybe Christian responses to the accusation of hypocritical, which is like, yes, we are.
Right.
However, I'm just curious, like, do you think that's like a made-up thought in people's mind? Like, oh, I just assume Christians are hypocritical. Do you think a lot of them have experienced that in some way? Do you have anything to say more specific than that?
I would say yes to both.
Okay. Got it.
Thoughts?
Yeah, I totally agree. I think something our generations, millennial, Gen Z, or whatever's in between, they spot out inauthenticity very quickly.
Got it.
We're very very sharp to know when someone's like beating around the bush with us and not being truthful. And a lot of the time, churches try to hide the bad within a church.
Got it.
And I think younger people see that and they're just kind of, why would I want to be part of this?
Right.
Just a lie,
Yeah.
And I think a lot of churches struggle with that type of authenticity because it's hard to be like, oh yeah, we're a church of Christ and all about love and promoting Christ and all of his work, and then at the same time to be like, oh, by the way,
we mess up.
So and so is getting a divorce. So and so is cheating on their spouse. Things like that.
Yeah, sure.
That can really create messes inside of a church. And if we were just like more authentic with our approaches to those types of issues, I feel like younger people will resonate way more with that. So.
My wheels are turning over here. I'm like, how, like, I think there's biblical examples in Jesus, in my mind in the Bible, I keep thinking about the Pharisee and the tax collector who kind of like, woe is me, I'm a mess, I can't believe you would deal with me, God. And the Pharisee is kind of like, hey, at least I'm not like that other person who's terrible over there. So I feel like I'm grasping what you're describing, and I think as a leader, one thing for sure is like, that starts at the top. And I sometimes find myself, this is just me trying to be honest here, like in this bind between like, where do you overshare authentically, but then where can it, I've seen examples where I think people try to like be super duper authentic, and then they just like, it comes across as like, I'm a giant mess and you should be a giant mess like me, and I'm like allowed to be just like a, self-indulgent, terrible person. I don't know if I'm getting that across clearly, but are you following the line that I'm thinking there?
Yeah, I'm sitting here kind of thinking like the authenticity doesn't have to be like oversharing in a church service or things like that. But if your pastor and your leader in the church is being authentic in their day-to-day life, it comes off like that in their preaching even.
Got it.
I'm just thinking like you can tell whenever there's a pressure. It almost feels like a pressure. It feels like a weight almost on a chest. Like if I know
to be something that you're not, like that's what you're
right. Yeah, like if I for example, like let's say you're obviously you are my pastor.
Here I am.
but let's say you're a pastor that is coming to me and confiding on like a bunch of issues that you have that you're hiding away from people that you should be talking to them about. Like, I'm going to be sitting there with that pressure of, like, living this false reality of, like, I know my pastor is struggling with these things, or maybe it's an issue that needs to be addressed. Maybe you're false prophesying, or maybe you're not preaching the word as the word. You gotta have the ability to have those authentic conversations outside of your preaching and with people that care about you, love you, and also people that might not know you that well. And you can kind of feel that pressure being alleviated if you are authentic in just your day to day. And you're not, at least that's my take on it. I think inauthenticity comes off way more whenever someone doesn't live a truly authentic type of lifestyle either, and just being true to like yourself. And I feel like it's easy to spot when someone's just being fake, right? Yeah. That's just my thought.
I have a couple of thoughts. One of them is like, who knew this was going to turn into basically a counseling session for how Luke can try to be a healthy pastor.
Now that you're here,
right? Exactly.
Bert and I actually
right. That's exactly what I was picturing, which was amusing to me. But then, so I think that's helpful about that line of thinking, and I process that a good bit. Like if I'm not, I think a giant issue for pastors is like they're a different person at home with their kids, and there's all this kind of whole problem of like pastors' kids being a hot mess because their dad loved the church more than they love their own kids at home. And so there's a thing that I'm aware of related to all that kind of dynamic. And so, yes, I think the inauthenticity thing is a big issue, and I think one solution is being more authentic like you're describing. I'm also personally curious. This might be diving a little deeper theologically than we want to or not, but I'm going to go there. I'm curious about kind of like a certain view of the gospel that's kind of like, hey, pray this prayer and get saved. And Jesus has a lot to say about your life after death, but not very much to say about your growth into becoming a healthier person while you're still on earth. And you guys have been around me, so you know that I kind of talk about that second part of that, excuse me, a lot, because I think that plays into what you're describing, where it's like, as long as you're, winning a lot of people to Jesus, if you're very unhealthy and, emotionally unhealthy, or your family's a hot mess or whatever, then that's all that really matters. Mm-hmm. And I just think that's not really how Jesus lived and who he was. I don't know if either of you have any thoughts about that dynamic of kind of like a view of salvation as not just for life after death, but also that God wants to make, whether you're a pastor or not a pastor, Christians healthier people now. Because I feel like if that was happening, theoretically, in my head at least, that helps with the hypocritical inauthenticity problem. Mm-hmm. Is that clear what I'm trying to say there?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Any thoughts?
There you go.
Okay. All right. I'm just thinking off the top of my head is like, I feel like that problem may be so vast and might be I don't think there's a point of no return, but it's a way bigger problem than it's going to, like, we want to tackle it. It's going to be we have to shape mindsets then, where like people that went to churches and just prayed the prayer and it's like, I'm saved and now I can just do whatever in life. Don't let Christ come into what's happening now in the current.
My marriage or my parenting or my authenticity or my hypocrisy or whatever.
Right. And that's a big issue to tackle. Yeah. And it's not going to be easy, which it's nice that our generation, we're kind of advocating for that, and the fact that the statistics are showing that more people are, in younger generations are coming to church.
Right.
Like that's a pretty big
shows
deal.
That they want that, which relates to another question I had on here, which I don't know personally how to think about this, but I have been processing it a little bit, is do you think the church is calling people in general, but in specific I'm talking to you guys, younger people, like, is part of our problem that we're calling them to like too little, like instead of calling them to like something like bigger and deeper and more intense, like is part of the challenge that young people are like, hey, I want something with real meaning and real depth and to change my whole life. And the church is kind of saying like, oh, just show up on a Sunday, that's cool. We just want to increase our numbers. Or do you follow what I'm saying? Like, do you think the church would benefit young people, or young people would be more excited if the church was calling them to like a deeper and deeper experience, or like something more challenging or a bigger adventure? Again, I don't know if that's being clear, but any thoughts on that? Like, should I be like, particularly with young people, you think it would be more beneficial to be like, hey, Jesus wants to like completely wreck your lives in more ways than you even know? Or is that kind of like, oh, that's too much, I don't want to do that yet?
I'm just thinking about people our age that are dating. They always say like, oh, I'd let him wreck my life, or I'd let her wreck my life.
Right, yeah.
It's like, why not let Jesus wreck you?
Right.
Yeah, that's very Girls Gone Bible there.
Yeah. Girls Gone Bible? I don't even know that phrase. That's hysterical. Okay.
Ask Juliana.
Yeah.
She's,
clearly I'm too old for this podcast. Yeah. Okay. I'm writing it down. Okay, good. Keep going.
I think that's fair. I think you don't want to force it though either.
Yeah.
I think it also depends on the person how you're going to approach it.
Yeah, right.
That's why it's so tricky, I think.
Yeah.
Like there's gentleness with some situations and dynamics. People have been, let's say, hurt or abused or messed up or that kind of thing. Yeah. And then maybe, to people who are feeling a little more stagnant or prideful, arrogant or whatever, like call that into something. Mm-hmm. That's just a little thought of it.
Yeah.
Huh. That's interesting. These are. I'm really glad we're doing this, because these are like real questions that I'm asking in my head to myself a lot, and so it's nice to chat about it. Maybe I'll just ask some more. Like, let's go back to Fern. You said earlier we're back to the second part of what I wanted to ask you about. Like, I really want honest answers here. What about churches is like out of date or like too I mean, you said earlier, Hayden, like some people are going back to tradition, and so I'm not against like, cool thing about Christianity is it's been an institution for 2,000 years. That's great, but like, what about churches sometimes feels like fuddy-duddy or just unhelpfully corny or whatever? Mm-hmm. Any thoughts about that? Besides your particular pastor? No, I'm just kidding.
No, I would say, like, just off the top of my head, sometimes I think the music can sound outdated to our generation, which is also difficult, though, because you have people in your church who enjoy that type of music, people who have been there for a long time.
I have a big comment I want to say about that, but we should write that on a list of another topic to discuss about is music at church as a whole podcast.
Well, there is,
exactly.
We're having Juliana Hartzler on our next podcast, and she wants to talk about music.
Sweet. Okay,
so.
we'll solve that further. Okay, see that.
I would also say that, like, it's not even so much the problem in the church, but it's a problem outside of the church that we have access to so much technology and everything's right at our fingertips, and we can have anything we want in an instant. That, like, coming to church is almost, like, boring. Like,
that's a fascinating idea.
That is really fascinating.
Because if I wanted information on something specific, I can get on TikTok or Instagram Reels and find the answer to my question in 3 seconds.
Super quick.
Yeah. And it's made us super impatient. And almost not wanting to go and sit through a service.
Right. Attention span is like a whole thing. And that's another rabbit trail we could take for 2 miles. But then another thing related to what you just said there, Fern, in my head is that I'm thinking a lot more nowadays about church as a place to grow relationships than as a place to get information. And I think the relational piece is what a lot of people, young or old, are really, really missing out on. And so, I mean, I've talked about this before, like the ecclesia, the church, the word means a body of people. It doesn't mean a place where you go and sit and listen to information. And so I feel like that has to play a part in what you're describing. Is that people want relationships, and you can't get that through in a meaningful way through the Instagram reel, whatever. But you have every information available to you all the time. That's super insightful.
I'm just smiling because I'm thinking of Chatgpt right now and AI and how that kind of plays into things. The other day, just for fun, I said that they have this really awesome advanced AI voice capability now. I can tell Chatgpt, I want you to be like a preacher from central Pennsylvania, and I want you to give me a sermon on John 3:16. And it will change its voice to sound like you're from Appalachia, central PA, and will give you a sermon on that specific thing. And it blew my mind because I'm thinking, like, you're right. Like, why go to church if I can just get church at home? If I can
with whatever question on whatever passage you want. It's like hyper individualized, which is also, to me, goes back to the same point about the relationship. It's still all like focused on what do I personally get out of this. Whereas I always like to frame the gospel as what can I give up of myself for others. And that's the part that you miss, though.
And I think where you need to kind of combat that specific issue is with facts. And the facts are mental health issues are on a continuous rise. Depression, anxiety, suicide. It's on an extreme rise. And it's a pretty significant correlation between technology, the evolution of technology, and those issues. And that more with social media and all of that. People are feeling more lonely than ever, but they have everything at their fingertips.
Can both of you tell me more about like your experience, or like not even necessarily your personal experience, but just like within the circles of people that you're around, like that, like actual stories of like, this is how you think. Like, I feel like I hear and know social media is like challenging to a lot of people's lives. I know for me personally, like I probably can get on a rabbit trail of YouTube videos and waste a lot of time doing that. Like I know that. I want to learn better what that feels like as a 20-some-year-old in the spheres that you're in. Do you have anything else to say about social media and its impact on, let's say, relationships or something?
I mean, I don't know if this exactly answers your question, but another thought I had talking about social media was like how much it's like desensitizing us.
What do you mean by that?
Like, if you say, for example, like whenever like 9/11 happened, people like left work. They were so worried. Like now it's just like you hear stuff like that every day. It's not even a big deal anymore. You hear all these tragedies happening, and it's just like in one ear and out the other, like, oh, that's sad, and then you move on with your day. And I just think that kind of plays a part in what you were describing. Like,
I heard on a podcast not too long ago, Fern, that one of the challenges of the instant media craze or whatever is that an individual can know almost all the bad information that historically only God could be aware of. And that really helped to frame it interestingly for me of like, we think about people as like trying to replace God or like being a God unto ourselves or like the unhealth that goes with playing God, quote unquote, playing God. And it's like, in a certain sense, even just by our access to that amount of negative information, we're playing God, and that we just can't handle that much sad stuff. And people feel guilt because it's like, well, I don't know all these things going on. Or people just get, and of course, bad news is what carries the day. And so that, comes at you all these different ways, and you're just aware of all this bad news. And I just feel so much compassion. Personally grew up and it's like you could watch the news if you wanted to, or you might hear some information on the radio or read the newspaper. But it wasn't like you had a device with you all the time that's like, hey, here's the most recent bad news. Here's an alert. Did you know that this terrible thing happened or whatever? So I think that's really, really hard. Do you want to say anything about social media? And then I have a follow-up question that I think would be even...
Just one thing I'm thinking about is I'm guilty of it myself. I'll convict myself of that crime where I wake up and the first thing I do is look at my phone and I scroll Twitter and... there's a really interesting movie. It's called The Social Dilemma. Have you guys seen that?
I haven't.
Wait, is that the one about Facebook?
Yes.
Yeah, I saw it. I just saw it on the plane last week.
Yeah, it's really fascinating. But they talk about how it's kind of like gambling. Right. And if you think about the function of like whenever you want to get something new on your newsfeed, you swipe down. It's like you're pulling the lever of a casino. And they've realized that in order to get people addicted to social media, you have to give them something new, something fresh every time they want something new. And that's why you just have that constant like refresh. You're pulling the lever of a slot machine. It's just the same type of mechanism that's happening. And that kind of changed my perspective. And I realized like I am addicted to social media. I get into Twitter in the morning and it's like, okay, if I do one pull of the lever, I see someone getting shot on my newsfeed. Then if I pull the lever again, it's like, oh, here's a puppy that makes you happy. And then you do it again, and it's back to a negative thing. And it's just this, it's like, oh, I got a bad thing. Now I got to try for another good thing. Oh, it's a bad thing. Got to try for a good thing now. It's like this constant spinning in your head of like, why do I keep doing that? And I know why I'm doing it. It's just like my finger keeps doing it. It keeps doing the motion,
And so, people can listen to and learn all about the dopamine stuff and all the brain chemical things related to that. And there's a lot of research about that now. But this is the question I was going to ask anyhow. So it led perfectly into that, Hayden, which is like, I keep being curious, like, what can the church do? And this kind of relates again to that idea of calling people to more. I forget his name now. Anxiety. Jonathan Haidt. There we go. Jonathan Haidt has some stuff on the problems with social media. He's a really interesting author. About all that stuff, and he has some like technical plans. So like one of the things he says is like kids should not get a phone before 10th grade, let's say, or whatever, I forget exactly his grade, 10th grade I think. You should purposely have times without your phone or times to turn your phone off, that kind of stuff. What I'm curious about is like, I don't even know, like if I said up front to the church, like, hey, we're all going to commit to taking a day without our phone or whatever, like, it's just so hard for me to fathom that being like, oh yeah, sign me up. Like I want that. But I do honestly think that would be really helpful for young people. Yeah. And so, I don't know, do you have any advice for me or thoughts about how to like navigate as a church leading and trying to help people to have a better relationship with technology? Like I know it's a problem. I know it's super significant. And I feel like it's such a deep thing that I don't even like. I feel like people would try to be like, people used to leave churches because they don't like the style of music or something. Like they'd leave the church because it's.
Well, I think that like you're already leading by example. We all know that you already like turn your phone off at least one day a week. And other than like educating people in a sermon, I don't know how Unless you have any thoughts, Hayden, on how he could approach.
I'm going to push back.
Okay.
I'm
Go
going
for
to
it.
criticize it.
Yeah, that's good.
It makes me sad that you are afraid to challenge people like that just because you can't fathom it. I feel like that's Satan telling you.
Well, it's
like to not do.
Not on this list of questions, but the other list of questions that had some kind of question I was going to talk to you guys about, like what are you afraid to do? What is the church afraid to do based on if people would like you or not like you, based on calling people to do that? And so
my answer is, who cares?
I mean,
I care.
I agree with that, but I think there's wisdom too in like how to present something in a way that's meaningful, and like I want to care for people. Like I don't think here's the end all be all solution. I know that for me, I'm trying to be so self-aware of my own failures in these areas, and I did not grow up with a cell phone at my fingertips, and I put in all these structures like you're talking about, Fern, for myself, and I've seen the personal benefits of that, and I just want to see that good go to other people. But I also think, maybe that's just something that I need to process some more and see in the future what that could look like. So again, back to Jonathan Haidt, he actually says he's not a Christian believer. He's, I think, Jewish. I read something from him which is so interesting to me. He said he thinks one of the leaders in this could be faith communities, because they might be able to get more buy-in than anyone else, because like no one else is doing this other than maybe like there's a trend nowadays towards schools saying no phones or that kind of stuff because of all the data about it.
Yeah.
But
that's kind of where I was going to go.
Right.
Where we have a church body of 200 people every week.
Yep.
Even if 10 people, if you give that challenge and 10 people do that, that's 10 souls that are experiencing that healthy feeling. Like I've gone a day without turning my phone on, and like the air I breathe feels different almost. And even if it's just 10 out of those 200 that do that, that's a really beneficial thing.
Well, it's very interestingly in my head ties in with the idea of Sabbath, and I've been thinking a lot about Sabbath. This is another rabbit trail, but we've been trying to practice Sabbath together as a family, and it's complicated when you do Sabbath with more than one person, because Sabbath for myself is like, well, I'll turn it off. Here's what are good things for me. Here's like stuff that gives me life. Here's ways that I could spend time with God. But then when you do that with other people, they have different priorities or different experiences, and that conflicts. So like my wife and I have a different experience of the same kinds of events if we share that in the Sabbath. Interestingly, like Sabbath was not in the Jewish culture in Jesus' day. It was a specific day for everybody. It was like the whole community Sabbath together. And what I've been curious and how I've been thinking about some of the stuff, even related to the tech and the cell phone, is like, what does it look like for the church to Sabbath well together? In the sense of like, hey, we're all going to have our phones off, but we're purposely going to have times to relate together, face to face, eat meals together, laugh, have that kind of stuff, and give life in a way that I think a lot of young folks are not experiencing in a super regular way, because even their experience of time with each other, like I just watch young people when I'm at a sporting event or whatever, is their phones are in their face, and for that middle-aged people and baby boomers, and it's not like anyone is exempt from this, little kids, whatever. So